The morning Sarah discovered her 100-year-old creek had vanished overnight, she thought it was a nightmare. But when she traced the missing water to her HOA president's suddenly lush backyard paradise, she realized the nightmare was just beginning. What started as stolen water would uncover a web of corruption so deep that by the time she stood at that town meeting podium, 3 lives would be destroyed, 2 marriages shattered, and one man's empire built on lies would come crashing, down in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the kitchen window, steam from her morning coffee fogging the glass as she stared at what should have been impossible. The creek that had meandered through her backyard for as long as anyone could remember, the same creek her grandmother had fished in, the same creek that had sold her on this house 3 years ago, was gone. Not dried up, not reduced to a trickle. Gone. Where rushing water had carved smooth stones and nurtured ancient willows just yesterday, now lay nothing but cracked mud and the confused debris of a stream bed suddenly abandoned by its purpose. "This can't be right," she whispered, setting down her mug with trembling hands. Sarah threw on her boots and robe, bursting through the back door into the crisp October morning. The silence hit her first. No gentle babbling, no water cascading over the small falls that had lulled her to sleep every night since she'd moved in. Just an eerie quiet that made her skin crawl. She jumped down into the empty creek bed, her boots sinking into the still wet clay. The smell of exposed earth and stranded algae filled her nostrils as she followed the dry channel upstream, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What the hell happened here?" she called out to no one, her voice echoing strangely in the morning air. The creek bed curved behind the Hendersons' property, then disappeared into the dense tree line that marked the beginning of Willowbrook Estate's most exclusive section. Sarah had rarely ventured this far upstream. The HOA had always been particular about residents staying on their own properties. But desperate times called for desperate measures. She pushed through the overgrown brush, branches catching at her robe as she tracked the ghost of her vanished creek. The dry bed continued for another 50 yards before she heard it. The sound that made her blood freeze in her veins. Water. The gentle splash and gurgle of moving water. Sarah burst through a final wall of elderberry bushes and stopped dead. There, not 30 feet from where her creek should have been flowing, was the most spectacular backyard oasis she had ever seen. Crystal clear water cascaded down an elaborate rock formation into a pristine swimming pool that seamlessly flowed into what appeared to be a natural pond complete with water lilies and ornamental fish. And there, floating on an inflatable lounger, in the middle of his stolen paradise was Marcus Donovan, HOA president, neighborhood tyrant, and apparently creek thief. "You son of a bitch," Sarah breathed. Marcus must have heard her because he turned lazily in her direction, his designer sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. When he spotted her standing there in her muddy boots and bathrobe, a slow smile spread across his face. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise." He paddled casually to the pool's edge, pulling himself out with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. "Bit early for a neighborhood stroll, isn't it?" "Where's my creek, Marcus?" He toweled off slowly, deliberately, his smile never wavering. "Your creek? I'm afraid I don't follow." "Don't play dumb with me." Sarah stepped closer, her hands clenched into fists. "That's my water. That's everyone's water. You can't just redirect a creek." "Can I?" Marcus draped the towel around his shoulders and gestured grandly at his aquatic wonderland. "According to my very expensive environmental consultant, this is actually the creek's natural course. Has been for centuries. Apparently some previous landowner illegally diverted it through your property decades ago. I'm simply correcting the situation." Sarah stared at him, speechless. The casual arrogance in his voice, the practiced way. He delivered what was obviously a rehearsed lie. It was breathtaking in its audacity. "That's impossible. My grandmother—" "Your grandmother wasn't a licensed hydrologist, was she?" Marcus interrupted smoothly. "Look, Sarah, I know this is disappointing. Change always is. But I have all the proper permits, all the environmental impact studies. Everything's completely above board." "Permits?" You got permits to steal my creek? To restore it to its natural course, Marcus corrected. The county was very cooperative once they understood the ecological benefits. Something in the way he said cooperative made Sarah's stomach turn. She'd lived in Willowbrook Estates long enough to know how Marcus operated. The carefully worded HOA violations that always seemed to target residents who opposed him, the mysterious exemptions granted to his friends, the way complaints against his own numerous rule violations always seemed to disappear. "This is insane," she said, her voice rising. "You can't just wake up one morning and decide to steal a creek. I didn't steal anything." Marcus's smile grew sharper. "But speaking of mornings, you might want to get dressed before the neighbors start talking. The HOA has very specific guidelines about appropriate attire in common areas." Common areas? This is... Sarah looked around, suddenly realizing she had no idea whose property she was actually standing on. "This is the old Hartwell lot," Marcus said, reading her confusion. "Purchased it last month through a holding company. Completely legitimate transaction. The creek restoration was just a happy coincidence." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, literally and figuratively. The Hartwell lot had been empty for years, a small piece of undeveloped land that everyone assumed would stay that way forever. She'd never even considered that someone might buy it, let alone use it to steal her creek. "You planned this," she whispered. "This whole thing was planned." "I plan everything, Sarah. That's why I'm HOA president, and you're standing in my backyard in a bathrobe throwing accusations around like a crazy person." The dismissal in his voice, the casual cruelty of it, hit her like a physical blow. Sarah had dealt with difficult neighbors before, but this was different. This was theft on a scale she couldn't even comprehend, dressed up in legal language and delivered with a smile. "The other residents will never stand for this," she said, backing toward the tree line. "When they find out what you've done. What I've done is improve the neighborhood's property values with a beautiful water feature that the county has officially certified as environmentally beneficial." Marcus began walking toward her, his casual demeanor shifting to something more predatory. "What you've done is trespass on private property and make wild accusations against a respected community leader." Sarah's back hit the elderberry bushes. "People will see through your lies." "Will they?" Marcus stopped just close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with chlorine. "Let me paint you a picture, Sarah. Tomorrow morning, every resident in Willowbrook Estates is going to receive a letter from the HOA explaining how your irresponsible water management has been damaging the local ecosystem for years. How the county has stepped in to correct the situation. How you've been fighting against environmental restoration efforts that will benefit the entire community." Sarah's mouth went dry. "That's not true. Truth is what people believe, and people believe what they read in official letters from their HOA president." Marcus leaned closer. "They also believe what they see, and what they're going to see is you, standing in my backyard in your pajamas, screaming like a lunatic about imaginary property rights." As if summoned by his words, Sarah heard voices approaching through the trees. Multiple voices getting closer. "Marcus," called a woman Sarah recognized as Helen Kraftmeyer from the HOA board. "We heard shouting. Is everything all right?" Marcus's smile returned, bright and innocent as a child's. "Everything's fine, Helen. Just a small misunderstanding. With our neighbor here." Helen emerged from the trees followed by two other HOA board members, Tom Rodriguez and Patricia Webb. All three stopped short when they saw Sarah standing there in her robe, muddy and disheveled, while Marcus stood calm and composed beside his stunning water feature. "Oh my," Helen murmured, taking in the scene with obvious disapproval. "Sarah was just admiring the creek restoration project," Marcus said smoothly. "Though I'm afraid she got a bit emotional about the changes." "Changes?" Tom looked confused. "What changes?" Sarah opened her mouth to explain, but Marcus was already moving, guiding the board members toward his pool with the practiced ease of a tour guide. "The county contacted me last week about correcting an illegal water diversion that's been damaging the watershed for decades," he explained. his voice carrying the perfect tone of civic responsibility. Apparently, when the original developments went in, someone rerouted the natural creek flow without proper permits. The environmental impact has been significant. But the creek runs through Sarah's property, Patricia said, glancing back at Sarah with concern. Actually, it doesn't, Marcus replied smoothly. That's what made this whole situation so complicated. The creek was artificially diverted through her yard in the 1960s. This, he gestured at his elaborate water feature, is where it naturally flows. Sarah watched in growing horror as the three board members nodded along. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard as she dove into the labyrinthine world of county records, her coffee growing cold as the afternoon sun slanted through her kitchen window. What she found in the first hour made her stomach clench with a familiar dread. Marcus's story was airtight, at least on paper. Environmental impact study filed 6 months ago. Check. Water diversion permit approved 3 weeks ago. Check. Historical. Survey claiming the creek's natural course ran through the old Hartwell property. Check. Every document bore official stamps, proper signatures, and language so technical it made her eyes water. But Sarah had spent 15 years as a forensic accountant before burning out and moving to Willowbrook Estates for the quiet life. She knew the difference between legitimate paperwork and an elaborate shell game. The devil was always in the details. She pulled up the environmental consultant's report first, a 40-page document authored by someone called Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, Environmental Sciences. The language was impressively scientific, full of watershed analysis and ecological impact assessments. But when Sarah ran Dr. Hawthorne's credentials through the state licensing database, she found something interesting. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne had died in 2019. Gotcha, Sarah whispered, her pulse quickening. She dug deeper. The company that had filed the environmental report, Cascade Environmental Solutions, had been incorporated just 8 months ago. Its registered address was a UPS store in the next county. Its sole employee, according to state records, was Marcus Donovan. Sarah leaned back in her chair, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Marcus hadn't just stolen her creek. He'd created an entire fictional consulting company to provide the scientific justification for the theft. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor Janet. Heard about the creek situation. So sorry. Let me know if you need anything. Word was already spreading, and Sarah could guess which version of events was making the rounds. She scrolled through the Willowbrook Estates neighborhood Facebook group and found her answer in a post from Helen Kraftmeyer. Important update from our HOA meeting today. The county has corrected an illegal water diversion that was harming our local ecosystem. While change is never easy, we're grateful for President Donovan's leadership in resolving this environmental issue. Let's all support our neighbors during this transition. The post already had 37 likes and comments ranging from "Thank you, Marcus" to "So responsible of the HOA to handle this properly." One comment from someone Sarah didn't recognize read, "About time someone dealt with that eyesore. Natural water features are so much better for property values." Sarah's hands shook as she typed her response. "This is not an environmental restoration. This is theft. The creek was illegally diverted to Marcus's property, not from it. I have proof." She hit enter and watched the comment appear, then immediately vanish. Her phone rang within seconds. "Sarah?" It was Helen, her voice strained with the particular tone reserved for managing difficult people. "I think there might be some confusion about the creek situation." "The only confusion is the lie you all just swallowed," Sarah said, not bothering, with pleasantries. "Now, let's not—" "Helen, did you know that Marcus created a fake consulting company to approve his own environmental impact study? Did you know the expert who signed off on the report has been dead for 6 years?" Silence, stretched across the line. When Helen finally spoke, her voice was smaller. "Sarah, those are very serious accusations. They're very serious crimes. Helen, you need to understand what's really happening here. Marcus didn't just take my creek. He's defrauded the county, created false documents, and probably bribed someone to get those permits pushed through." I can't believe Marcus would do something like that. Because you don't want to believe it. Sarah softened her tone. Helen, I know this is hard. Nobody wants to think their HOA president is a criminal, but I need you to look at the evidence. What evidence? Sarah quickly emailed Helen the screenshots she'd taken of the fake consulting company, the dead expert's credentials, and the timeline showing how Marcus had purchased the Hartwell property just days before filing for the environmental study. Check your email, Sarah said. Look at the dates, Helen. Look at the connections. This wasn't some county initiative. This was a planned theft. She could hear Helen typing on the other end of the line. The silence stretched for nearly 5 minutes before Helen spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh my God. Now you see it. Sarah, if this is true, if Marcus really did all this, Helen's voice cracked. The HOA board could be legally liable. We signed off on supporting the county's decision without doing our own investigation. That's exactly what Marcus was counting on. He knew you'd all rubber stamp anything that came with official letterhead and fancy language. What do we do? It was the question Sarah had been hoping for. We expose him. At the next town meeting. Sarah, that's only 3 days away. We can't wait, Sarah interrupted. Every day that passes, Marcus gets more entrenched. Right now, this is still fresh. People might be willing to listen to the truth, but if we let him control the narrative for weeks, he'll destroy us, Helen finished quietly. He'll destroy all of us. After hanging up with Helen, Sarah continued her digital excavation. What she found over the next few hours painted a picture of corruption so systematic it took her breath away. Over the past 3 years, Marcus had used his position as HOA president to orchestrate at least 6 other schemes. The community garden that had mysteriously become a private patio for his friend Tom Rodriguez. The walking trail that had been temporarily rerouted through his business partner's undeveloped lot, conveniently clearing the way for a luxury development. The community fund that had somehow paid for a new roof on Marcus's own house, disguised as maintenance for the community center that was never built. Each scheme followed the same pattern: official-looking paperwork, fake expert consultations, and a compliant HOA board that trusted their president's version of events. But the creek theft was different. It was bigger, more brazen, and it had left a paper trail that could bring down everything Marcus had built. Sarah was so absorbed in her research that she didn't notice the car pulling into her driveway until she heard the sharp knock on her front door. She glanced at the clock, almost 9 p.m. Through the peephole, she saw Marcus Donovan standing on her porch, still wearing his country club attire but looking less composed than he had that morning. Behind him, barely visible in the darkness, stood 2 other figures. Sarah's blood ran cold. She recognized them from the HOA meetings. Brad Hutchins and Mike Fortescue, Marcus's inner circle. Both men were built like former football players and had the kind of dead eyes that suggested they enjoyed their work as Marcus's enforcers. Sarah, Marcus called through the door, his voice carrying the false warmth she'd learned to recognize. I think we need to talk. Sarah backed away from the door, her heart hammering. She'd been so focused on building her case that she hadn't considered how Marcus might react to having his secrets exposed. It's a bit late for social calls, Marcus, she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. It's never too late to clear up misunderstandings between neighbors. The way he emphasized misunderstandings made Sarah's skin crawl. She grabbed her phone and quickly texted Helen. Marcus is at my door with 2 men. If something happens, to me, check his background. The corruption goes back years. Sarah? Marcus's voice had lost its warmth. I know you've been doing some research today, making some calls, sending some emails. I'd like to discuss what you think you've discovered. The fact that he knew about her activities meant he'd been monitoring her somehow. Sarah glanced around, her house suddenly paranoid about hidden cameras or listening devices. Had Marcus had access to her home during the previous HOA inspections? I've discovered that you're a fraud and a thief, she called back. And tomorrow the whole town is going to know it. Silence from the porch. then the sound of quiet conversation between the three men. "Sarah," Marcus said finally, "I'm going to give you one chance to be reasonable. This situation doesn't have to escalate. You're upset about the creek. I understand that. What if we worked out some kind of compensation? A reduction in your HOA fees? Maybe a small water feature for your own backyard?" "You mean a bribe?" "I mean a mutually beneficial arrangement between neighbors." Sarah looked out her back window at the empty creek bed, ghostly in the moonlight. The sight filled her with a rage so pure it burned away her fear. "Go to hell, Marcus." The response was immediate. The sound of her front door handle being tested, then the scrape of metal against metal. They were trying to pick her lock. Sarah ran to her landline and dialed 911, but the line was dead. She checked her cell phone. No signal. They were jamming her communications somehow. The front door handle stopped rattling. Sarah held her breath, hoping they had given up. Then she heard footsteps moving around the side of her house toward the back. They were going to break in. Sarah grabbed her laptop and the folder of documents she'd printed, then ran for her bedroom closet. She had maybe 30 seconds before they found a way inside. Hidden behind her winter coats, she opened her laptop and frantically uploaded everything to the cloud, the fake CO. The Willowbrook Community Center hadn't seen a crowd like this in its 20-year history. By 6:30, 30 minutes before the monthly town meeting was scheduled to begin, every chair was filled and people were standing 3 deep along the walls. Sarah counted at least 200 faces, nearly every resident of Willowbrook Estates, plus what looked like half the county. She sat in the front row, her laptop bag clutched in her lap, watching Marcus Donovan work the room like a politician at a campaign rally. Despite everything that had happened in the past 3 days, the police investigation, the news coverage, the growing mountain of evidence, he appeared confident, even jovial. "Evening, Mrs. Patterson," she heard him say to an elderly woman near the back. "Hope you're not here because of all that media nonsense. You know how reporters love to blow things out of proportion." Sarah's jaw clenched. Even now, even with criminal charges pending, Marcus was still trying to control the narrative. Sheriff Martinez approached her row, his weathered face grim. "Miss Chen, you ready for this?" Sarah nodded, though her stomach was churning. "Is the DA here?" "Linda's in the back. So is Channel 7, Channel 3, and someone from the county paper." Martinez glanced around the packed room. "This is going to be quite a show." Helen Kraftmeyer appeared at Sarah's elbow, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her usually perfect composure had cracked completely. "Sarah, I need you to know, the board voted. We're removing Marcus as president effective immediately. Tom and Patricia are drafting a full apology to the community." "Good," Sarah said quietly. "But that's not going to be enough." "I know." Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. "The lawyers are saying the HOA could face civil liability for all of his schemes. People could lose their homes, Sarah. The insurance might not cover fraud." It was a conversation they'd had several times over the past 2 days, as the full scope of Marcus's corruption became clear. The fake consulting companies were just the beginning. Deeper investigation had revealed embezzled funds, kickback schemes, with local contractors, and forged documents dating back to Marcus's first year as HOA president. At exactly 7 p.m., Helen walked to the podium with the reluctant steps of someone approaching a gallows. The room fell silent. "Good evening, everyone. I know this is an unusual gathering." Her voice wavered slightly. "Before we begin, I need to make an announcement regarding recent events involving our HOA president, Marcus Donovan." Marcus stood up from his seat in the second row, his smile never faltering. "Helen, I think it would be appropriate for me to address the community directly about these unfortunate misunderstandings." "Sit down, Marcus." The voice came from the back of the room. District Attorney Linda Reyes, flanked by 2 county investigators. "You'll have plenty of opportunities to speak when we're done here." For the first time since Sarah had known him, Marcus Donovan looked genuinely rattled. The confident mask slipped just enough to reveal something desperate underneath. "This is highly irregular," he protested. "I'm the duly elected president of this HOA, and I demand—" "You're not president of anything anymore," Helen interrupted, finding her voice. "The board voted unanimously to remove you from office, effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sarah saw neighbors turning to each other, confusion and concern on their faces. Most of them still didn't understand what was really happening. That was about to change. Helen gestured for Sarah to join her at the podium. "Sarah Chen has uncovered information that the entire community needs to hear." "Sarah?" Sarah's legs felt unsteady as she walked to the front of the room. 200 pairs of eyes focused on her, including the unblinking stare of the Channel 7 camera in the back corner. She'd rehearsed this moment in her head dozens of times, but now that it was here, the words seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what she'd discovered. "3 days ago, I woke up and found that my creek was gone," she began, her voice carrying, clearly in the silent room. "Not dried up, not redirected, gone. Stolen by a man who was supposed to be serving this community's best interests." She opened her laptop and connected it to the room's projection system. The first image that appeared was an aerial photo of her property from 6 months ago, clearly showing the creek flowing through her backyard. "This is what Willowbrook Creek looked like in March, and this," she clicked to the next image, taken that morning, "is what it looks like now." The second photo showed Marcus's elaborate water feature in sharp detail, complete with waterfalls, ornamental pools, and the unmistakable curve of the stolen creek feeding into his private paradise. A woman in the third row gasped, "Oh my God!" "Marcus Donovan didn't just steal my creek," Sarah continued, clicking through her evidence slides. "He created an elaborate fraud to make the theft appear legal. He incorporated a fake consulting company. He forged documents using the credentials of a dead environmental scientist. He bribed county officials to push through permits that should never have been approved." The room erupted in voices, shocked exclamations, angry demands for explanation, confused questions. Sarah waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "But the creek is just the beginning." She clicked to a new slide, showing a timeline of Marcus's schemes. "Over the past 3 years, your HOA president has embezzled over $200,000 from community funds. He's used his position to enrich himself and his friends while hiding behind fake expertise and fraudulent paperwork." The timeline was devastating in its detail. Each scheme was laid out chronologically, with supporting documentation and financial records. The community garden that became Tom Rodriguez's private patio, $15,000 in community funds. The walking trail rerouted through his business partner's development, $30,000 in environmental consulting fees paid to another of Marcus's fake companies. The phantom community center that existed only on paper while Marcus used the construction. Budget to renovate his own home, $85,000. "This is preposterous." Marcus shot to his feet, his composure finally cracking completely. "These are baseless accusations from a disgruntled neighbor who can't accept a legitimate environmental restoration." "Sit down, Mr. Donovan," DA Reyes called from the back. "We'll discuss legitimacy when you're in court." But Marcus was beyond reason now. He pushed past his row of neighbors and strode toward the podium, his face flushed with rage. "You people don't understand what I've done for this community. Property values have increased 40% since I became president. We have the cleanest, most well-maintained development in the county. And this is how you repay me? By listening to the paranoid fantasies of some bitter woman who exposed you for the criminal you are?" Sarah interrupted, not backing down as Marcus approached. "Who did what the rest of this community was too afraid to do? Ask questions when something didn't add up." Marcus stopped just inches from her, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that was nevertheless picked up by the room's microphones. "You have no idea what you've unleashed, Sarah. No idea what the consequences of your little investigation are going to be." "Actually, I do." Sarah clicked to her final slide, a summary of the criminal charges being filed. Wire fraud, mail, fraud, embezzlement, bribery of public officials, Environmental crimes. The FBI is taking over the case tomorrow morning because some of your schemes crossed state lines. The color drained from Marcus's face. Behind him, Sarah could see Brad Hutchins and Mike Fortescue edging toward the exits, clearly recognizing that their association with Marcus had just become a serious liability. "You're looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison," Sarah continued. "And that's assuming you cooperate with the investigation. If you fight this, if you continue lying and trying to manipulate people, they'll throw everything they can at you." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and in his eyes, Sarah saw the exact moment when he realized it was over. The confident facade, the political charm, the elaborate web of lies, all of it was crumbling in real time. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "You don't understand. I was trying to improve things, make the community better. Sometimes you have to bend the rules a little to get things done." "You didn't bend rules," Sarah replied. "You broke laws. You stole from your neighbors. You betrayed the trust of everyone in this room who believed in you." The room had fallen completely silent again, 200 people transfixed by the confrontation playing out before them. Sarah could see the shock on their faces as the full scope of Marcus's betrayal sank in. "The worst part," she continued, "isn't even the money or the creek. It's that you made us all complicit. Every time someone questioned your decisions and was told to trust the board, every time a neighbor's complaint was dismissed as troublemaking, every time we looked the other way because the paperwork seemed official, we were enabling this." Helen stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah's right. We failed you all. I failed you. The board should have been asking harder questions, demanding more transparency. We let our trust in Marcus blind us to what was really happening." District Attorney Reyes moved forward, flanked by her investigators. "Marcus Donovan, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit bribery. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs click. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her backyard watching the morning sun dance across the restored creek, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands. The water ran clear and strong, following the path it had carved for over a century before Marcus Donovan's greed had temporarily diverted its course. The sound of her back gate opening made her turn. Helen Kraftmeyer approached, carrying 2 manila folders and wearing the expression of someone who'd learned to expect bad news around every corner. "Morning, Sarah. Sorry to bother you so early, but we got the final report from the forensic accountants." Sarah gestured to the picnic table she'd installed beside the creek. "How bad is it this time?" Helen sat down heavily, looking older than her 58 years. The stress of managing Willowbrook Estate's recovery from Marcus's fraud had aged everyone involved. But Helen bore the particular burden of having been the board member who'd trusted him most completely. "The total embezzlement is now at $347,000, Helen said, opening the first folder. "That's up from the 200 we knew about at the town meeting." Sarah whistled low. "Where was he hiding the rest?" "Offshore accounts, fake vendor payments, a shell company in the Cayman Islands that apparently existed solely to launder HOA fees." Helen rubbed her temples. "The FBI says it's one of the most sophisticated municipal fraud schemes they've seen." "And the restitution?" "Marcus's assets covered about 60%. His house sold for $450, the luxury cars brought in another $80,000, and they liquidated his investment accounts." Helen opened the second folder. "The insurance company is fighting us on the rest. They're claiming the board's failure to provide oversight constitutes negligence that voids our coverage." It was the conversation Sarah had been dreading for months. In the immediate aftermath of Marcus's arrest, the community had rallied together in righteous anger. But as the financial reality of his theft became clear, unity had given way to blame, lawsuits, and the kind of bitter infighting that destroyed neighborhoods. "What does that mean for the individual residents?" "Special assessment of $1,200 per household to cover the shortfall. Due within 60 days. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She could afford the assessment, but she knew dozens of families in Willowbrook Estates who couldn't. Fixed-income retirees, young families already stretched thin, people who'd been struggling even before their HOA fees tripled to cover Marcus's theft. "Helen, that's going to bankrupt half the neighborhood." "I know." Helen's voice cracked slightly. "We've already had 6 families put their houses on the market. The Hendersons are talking about foreclosure. And Tom Rodriguez?" She trailed off. "What about Tom?" "He's being indicted next week. Turns out the patio renovation was just the beginning. The prosecutors found evidence that he helped Marcus set up some of the shell companies in exchange for a cut of the profits." Sarah closed her eyes. Tom Rodriguez had 3 kids and a wife who worked part-time at the elementary school. His downfall would destroy an entire family. "How many others are involved?" "The investigation is ongoing, but Patricia Webb's name keeps coming up in the financial records. And Brad Hutchins has already fled the state, apparently skipped town, the day after Marcus was sentenced." The sentencing had been its own media circus. Marcus Donovan, once the imperious ruler of Willowbrook Estates, had stood before a federal judge looking like a broken man in an ill-fitting public defender's suit. 18 years in federal prison, plus full restitution. His lawyer had tried to argue for leniency based on Marcus's community service, but the judge had been unimpressed by claims that embezzlement somehow constituted civic engagement. "Sarah," Helen continued, "there's something else. Something I need to tell you before the next community meeting." The tone in Helen's voice made Sarah's blood run cold. "What now?" "The state attorney general's office is opening an investigation into our response to the fraud. They're saying the HOA board should have caught Marcus's schemes earlier, that our failure to provide adequate oversight makes us criminally negligent." Sarah stared at Helen in disbelief. "They want to prosecute you for being victimized?" "Us. They want to prosecute all of us who served on the board during Marcus's tenure. The grand jury is meeting next month." The cruel irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Helen Kraftmeyer, who had risked everything to help expose Marcus's corruption, now faced potential criminal charges for not exposing it sooner. The woman who'd forwarded evidence to law enforcement was being accused of criminal negligence by those same authorities. "Helen, that's insane! You had no way of knowing." "Didn't we?" Helen's voice was bitter. "I've been thinking about it for months, Sarah. All the red flags we ignored, the vendor contracts that were never put out for bid, the environmental consultants we never verified, the financial reports that were always just vague enough to avoid real scrutiny." Sarah understood the guilt. She'd been wrestling with it herself. How many times had she noticed something that didn't quite add up, but dismissed it as neighborhood politics? How many residents had complained about Marcus's high-handed tactics only to be told they were troublemakers? "We trusted him," Sarah said quietly. "That doesn't make us criminals. Try telling that to the families who are losing their homes because of our trust." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle sound of the creek. Sarah watched a blue heron land in the shallow water downstream, its movements careful and deliberate as it hunted for fish that had returned to the restored waterway. "You know what the worst part is?" Helen said finally. "What?" "He was right about one thing. Property values did go up while he was president, 43% over 3 years. The community did look beautiful, the amenities were well maintained, and people were generally happy." Sarah nodded. It was the most troubling aspect of the entire affair. Marcus's crimes had produced genuine benefits for many residents. The stolen money had funded improvements that made Willowbrook Estates one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the county. "The Hendersons told me yesterday that they actually miss him," Helen continued. "Can you believe that? They're facing foreclosure because of his theft, but they miss the way things were when he was running everything." "Fear of chaos is stronger than anger at injustice," Sarah said. "People would rather have a corrupt leader who makes the trains run on time than deal with the mess that comes after." It was a dynamic Sarah had watched play out across the community over the past 6 months. The immediate aftermath of Marcus's arrest had been gratifying. Justice served, truth revealed, the villain punished. But the long-term consequences had proven far more complex and painful than anyone anticipated. The new HOA board, led by Helen, struggled with basic decisions that Marcus had made unilaterally for years. Committee meetings that once lasted 30 minutes now dragged on for hours as residents debated every expenditure, questioned every vendor, and demanded documentation for every decision. The community pool had been closed for 3 months because no one could agree on which contractor to hire for routine maintenance. The landscaping had deteriorated because the board was afraid to approve any expenditure over $500 without a full resident vote. Even basic decisions like snow removal contracts had become exercises in bureaucratic paralysis. "Sometimes I wonder if we should have just kept our mouths shut," Helen said. "Let him keep stealing, keep lying, keep running his little kingdom. At least people's lives weren't being destroyed." Sarah turned to face her friend directly. "Helen, look at me. If we hadn't exposed him, how much more would he have stolen? How many more families would he have defrauded? How many other communities would he have moved on to destroy? But the people who are suffering now, the Hendersons, the Patels, the young couple with the new baby who can't afford the special assessment, they're suffering because of what we did. They're suffering because of what Marcus did. We just made sure he couldn't keep doing it." Helen was quiet for a long moment, watching the creek flow past. "The FBI agent told me something interesting yesterday. They've found evidence that Marcus was planning to expand his operation. He'd already incorporated shell companies in 3 other states and was looking at HOA communities in Florida and Arizona. So this wasn't the end for him. It was just the beginning." "Exactly. We didn't just save Willowbrook Estates. We saved dozens of other communities from going through what we're going through now." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled for the first time in the conversation. "What is it?" Helen asked. "Remember Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne? The dead environmental scientist whose credentials Marcus used for his fake reports?" "Of course. Her daughter just texted me. She's a lawyer in California, and she's been following our case in the news. She wants to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Marcus for defaming her mother's professional reputation posthumously." Helen's eyebrows shot up. "Can you do that? Sue someone for defaming a dead person?" "Apparently so. And get this. She's also offering to represent the HOA in our insurance dispute, pro bono. She says her mother spent her entire career fighting environmental fraud and she'd be honored to continue that fight." For the first time in months, Helen smiled genuinely. That's wonderful, Sarah." "It gets better.